Okay, so once we're in Maya, or I'm sorry, in Mudbox, we can come in and import our ship in here. Now you might have a dialog box that initially pops in here. Just close that out, and then inside of Mudbox, we'll just go to File, Import, find our ship, and we'll import that into our scene. Now this one, I don't know why it keeps giving me errors, but everything seems to be fine. Hold on one second. It says poly surface 11. Poly surface 11 is, oh, doesn't like these drums, which I don't know why. Everything should be, oh. It should be fine on those. I don't know why it doesn't like those. But if we say keep this mesh, keep all, everything seems to be fine. It just doesn't, for some reason, does not like those drums, but we should be able to get around that. Okay, so once your ship's in here, you can go to your object list and you can see all the different meshes that make up our ship. So we've got our chassis and all these different pieces here. We can go ahead and turn those off if we want to. Say we want to just paint the chassis by itself. We can do so. Grab that guy, turn these guys off. There we go. We'll work on this piece by itself. Now to get this type of a look, mine might have already been preset, but outside your mesh in Mudbox, if you right click, you've got flat lighting. I like to turn that on, especially if I'm doing painting. And I also turn on my wireframe so I can just see what I'm painting while I'm doing that. And that's just right clicking outside your mesh. You get this little fly around menu. Now to do painting, again in Mudbox, we've got our sculpt tools and our paint tools, curve tools, pose tools, etc. We're just going to be using our paint tools. And to do this, really easy, I'm just going to come down to paint. And with my model in view, I'm just going to click it. And I'm going to say paint layer 1. We'll just call that, I don't know, chassis. It's fine. All right. Say OK. Now, all your options for whatever tool you're selecting are located with the actual brush that you have selected. So if I go to paintbrush, you'll see, boom, in here, I've got different options. Oh, I can bring my options view here so I can change the color. Say done. And if I go to my layers view, we'll see the layers that I'm actually painting on right here. So I can just come in and start painting on my model. And voila, the paint appears on both sides. All right? Super, super powerful. Now, usually I want to create some type of base layer that I can then start adding on top of. So I've got gray selected. That's great. I'm going to come down to flood paint layer. We're going to flood that entire layer with paint. Okay, so now we've got a nice gray model to work from. Now, usually at this phase, I like to come in with my burn tool, and I'll actually start burning in shadows on my model just to kind of add some little shadow depth. So I go around my model on the base, and I'll just come in and kind of paint little shadows here and there just to kind of get it going better. Now, Mudbox doesn't work great with a mouse if you're using a mouse. It's not wonderful with it, but it does work. But just, I'm using a pen right now, so my pressure is all pressure based. But you'll notice on your, at the top, you have the strength menu. If you're on a particular paintbrush or whatever, that strength, you just have to change that with your mouse and use that if you're going to paint it by hand, which probably most of you are. Let's come in here. We'll just start painting in some more shadows on here. All right. I just like to go around my model and just kind of set those initial layers for where my shadows are going to be. can do those by either painting or whatever. Let's come in here and paint some of these. Grab a color here, darker color. And just kind of paint away some of the colors that you want. Use your bracket keys to change your brush size on your keyboard. So you can come in here and just kind of change away some of those. Notice if you work with smaller brushes in Mudbox, it seems to work better. If you use big ones, you get that weird kind of pixelated effect. So you might want to mess around with that. Now, one of the things I really like to do if I'm working on like a spaceship is panel lines, right? So I'm going to come in here with a smaller brush, and this will help just kind of map out the overall form. And I've got my wireframe selected here so I can see what I'm doing. But what I like to do is underneath my brush settings for paint, I like to do my steady stroke. I turn this on and I'll bring it out to like 10 for my distance. But what it does is you can click an area. Actually, you know what, we'll go 5. I can click an area and then drag and then pull out those lines as needed. So if I'm trying to kind of map out a particular area on my ship or whatever I'm designing, I can kind of pull out those details and then draw them in as needed with nice lines, right? So I can come in here and you're just like dragging out these shapes, all right? It's kind of a really nice tool for doing this type of effect. And you have to go over some areas again and again just to kind of get it perfect. Right. But you can map out, like, you know, right now I'm working on the cockpit. All right, I can really kind of map out, okay, this is how my design's gonna look. Go over my model here and just start really fine-tuning those sections. And this is kind of a process, right? But you know, the more you do it, if you outline, like, let's say this entire ship, and then you come in and basically just color in these little areas, you can get some really cool effects done on your models really, really easily just by kind of just dragging out these little panel lines. See, right now I'm starting to map out where this cockpit is. All right, come up here. Get some interesting shapes just by kind of dragging into each other. Coming in here. I'll try to go quick here. I really like using the steady stroke just to kind of get a better outlook on the design. Now the cool thing is once you do that, then you can come in with, say, like your dodge tool, and you can start hitting up some of these edges where like the light would hit on the model, right? And you just kind of come in and just start coloring a lot of those edges there, and very quickly your model starts to pop out a lot more than just something basic, right? And you're really not doing much. You're just adding panel lines and then you're just highlighting them, right? So I know it's a little bit of, you know, artistic flair, but it adds a lot to your model just by doing that, coming in and just kind of highlighting these lines. And typically when I'm doing things like a spaceship, I'll do this process. I'll come in and I'll just start kind of highlighting areas, adding in panel lines, right? Saying, okay, that's where the cockpit is, right? Then I'll come in and, you know, again, find little moments where I can come in and highlight those areas up, right? Like that. It really helps make your model pop a little bit more. I'm not expecting you, you know, to be, you know, great artisans, but, you know, try out some of those techniques. They're really going to help you in your texturing process, just to take it a little bit further than it normally is. Now with your layers, so I'm just kind of working on this little cockpit here. You know, you could come in and add little details too once you map out your areas. Say I bring my brush size down a little bit, you know, you can find little moments for oh, you know, maybe, let me turn my steady stroke off for a second. You know, maybe add in some little, I don't know, some little details here and there that make it look cooler, right? You can do a lot of that just by coming in and then maybe even freehanding some parts if needed, right? Just coming in and just kind of tracing those out. Right. Freehanding and using the panel lines and using your wireframe as a guide really helps in your texturing process if you really want to get into it and like the nitty-gritty of it. Some of it doesn't really have to make sense, but you know, it can start looking cool the more you come in and just kind of adding some flair to it, right? Just adding some little highlights. I'm not doing much here. I'm just kind of just having some fun with it. Right, come in here. Just adding little details here and there just to kind of spruce it up, right? And this really applies to really any model that you're going to be texturing. Anything that's low poly, especially I think for AR, I really think a lot of the hand painted stuff just looks better the more time you kind of spend on it and just play around with it. You can get some really nice results just by hand painting stuff. I really dig it. You know, find those moments where you need to come in with shadows and highlights, and I bounce back a lot between the burn, the dodge, and the paintbrush. And on the paintbrush, I'll either turn my steady stroke on or off as needed to kind of get the desired effect I'm going for. All right, and I just kind of bounce around and just keep adding in little highlights and whatever as I go to kind of get those effects. Now, one of the reasons I work in grayscale like I'm doing right here is one, to get that kind of highlight effect, right? But the other is to add color layers on top. So you usually want to have like your black and white layer that you do all your shadows and light detail and highlights and everything on here, like right here. And then on top of it, add a new layer. I add my color layer, and in here, I'll set this. There, you can do blend modes, which is kind of nice in Mudbox. But in here on my paint layer, I'll come, instead of normal, I'll just make this a color layer. So this top layer, just like in Photoshop, I'll make this a color layer. And then all I have to do is, let's say I want to make this cockpit yellow, choose my paintbrush, come up to yellow, and because I'm on top of this layer, I can easily just change my paint size, just start coloring in, almost like a coloring book. Right, you just come in and color right over the top of those specific areas, and it keeps all that nice highlight data that you have underneath it because it's just adding color into the mix. All right, so you're just kind of like applying, you're injecting color into these little areas. All right, so you want to learn just kind of stacking those layers together. And messing around with that. And then what's cool is in the colors, once you start getting color down, then you can start playing with the blending of your colors and, you know, really start hammering out the details of how you want to blend a lot of these colors together and get some really nice, cool, desired effects in here, right? You can kind of have fun with that and just get some really cool stuff. Come in with some darker colors if needed, and you know, really start playing around with that. Really cool what you can do with it, but I really like using that. You know, I can come in with, let's say I'm going to come in with like a blue metal I want, right? And I can just start painting that kind of blue metal down here and putting that color in there. Really have some fun with just getting some nice colors that jump out at you, right? And play around with the blending modes too. You know, you don't always have to do color. You can you know, mess around with those modes and kind of get some different effects depending on what you want to do. But typically, you know, I'm always kind of just working on this base layer, And I'm going to go back here to my steady stroke. And 5 is a pretty good distance, but with that selected, let's just come up and just make my brush size a little bit smaller. You can just come in and get some nice effects, right? Especially if it's like a ship. You're gonna have a lot of these like little panels and different things on here. All right, come in and just start kind of tracing them out. Really start putting that thing together. All right, so there's a lot you can do with it. It's super fun to just kind of sit there and just paint till your heart's content. I will say that you know, it is better to use a tablet for this kind of work. If you're interested in it, if you want to do this kind of stuff, I would say use a tablet. The results are going to be much better just from an artist perspective. But you can use a mouse too. If I just go ahead and use my mouse in here, I can, you can, especially for panel lines and things like that, you can drag those out pretty easily with a mouse to kind of get those desired effects. Now, I'm not going to go through and trace the whole thing. Probably later this week I'll upload a total traced out version for you. But I want to show you some other mixing modes. So right now, I've got my base layer, and then I add paint over the top of it for the color layer, right? Another mode is using incandescence, so having things glow. So just for the hell of it, I'm going to make another layer really quickly. And I'm not going to have any blend on, it's just going to be a straight paint layer. And let's just go ahead and say, you know what, we want to do, I don't know, some glowing little rocket engines in here or something, right? I'm going to turn my steady stroke off, and let's just paint, let's paint some cool kind of lights or something in here, right? So I'm going to go blue. Maybe I'll make them a little bit bigger. Alright, so I've got some nice blue, and then maybe in the middle gets a little bit whiter. Just mess with that color. Maybe in the blue it gets a little bit, like whiter, right? Okay, so what we can do is with incandescence, we can come in, and if I go to new layer, we have these different channels. So if we're just painting color, it's on our diffuse layer. It's always on our diffuse layer. But if we want to add glow, we can go to incandescence. And we'll just call this, we'll call it glow. Glow. And you can paint those kind of glowy layers on here. Oh, we need to change our lighting. So outside my model here, right click and go flat lighting. So yeah, whoops. You can paint those glows to kind of light things up. So after you start getting your model textured and you start adding in those little details, you can come in and start doing things like painting glows, right? To make things really pop out at certain things. And let's say that, those look good right there, but maybe my cockpit too, I want to have that kind of lit up a little bit. Come in here and maybe kind of paint some light on there, right? By mixing a lot of these layers, you can get some really nice effects just by coming in and mixing things like glows, and you can go in with metallic effects. So incandescents are your glows, but if I right click and say let's make another layer, and on this layer let's do our specular, I can come in here and we'll just call it highlights. These are kind of like those highlights that you'll get when light hits an object. I can come in here, and with white, specular is like, think about your grayscale range, your whites and darks, right? I can come in here, and let me just, these are where you can paint those like metal sheens when light hits off something. So let's say I'm using the white right here just to kind of paint this area. Maybe down the side right here too. There, maybe right there too. You see how the light kind of starts refracting off those little areas? You can really use that to your advantage in certain parts of your model, especially the edges. It's always good to come in the edges with your specular and kind of have those hit. See, the more you start adding with those, you start getting some really nice effects. right? You can really go nuts with those. And then the next thing you can do, even beyond all of that, is you can start painting in your bump maps or your normal maps. But in here I can make another layer, go new layer, and then I can go down to my bump maps right here, and then just like grayscale, dark being the lowest depth, white being the highest depth, you can come in with your paintbrush, and let's just say we go to like not fully black but kind of dark right there, and I'll bring in my, let me go back to my steady stroke, make this brush a little bit smaller. I can retrace over a lot of these lines and start carving in those details to actually give the model depth. All right. So you can see, then you start getting like these actual depth areas to the model, right? You can use this for a variety of different methods, but that's really helpful as well. It's kind of like a process, and this stuff does take a while. It's not exactly something that's happens like immediately. There's no super quick way to get around it. There are some better programs, I would say, to accomplish this, but Mudbox, for beginners, I think is really worth it, and it's really going to help you guys and just kind of learning the tools and what they can do. You see, I'm just kind of coming around here and tracing out this depth, right? And the model really starts to pop the more you start mixing and adding layers and just kind of really going nuts with it. You can go crazy, add some really cool stuff. On top of that, you can come back in with, if I go back to my diffuse layers, and then I go down to here, and then my dodge tool, I can come back in and kind of go back and forth between adding in where my bumps are, where other pieces are, right? There's a lot you can do with it. Super fun, and there's a lot to do. Painting tutorial for something like this would probably take a couple hours to really get something that looks nice, and I'll try to do that for you guys. I'll continue to work on this, but I wanted to show you, what you can do with Mudbox. I'll give you guys this ship to actually do something with and paint your own textures on there. Just have fun with it. That'll be part of the other assignment. What we're going to do for the next part of the assignment is we're going to be building a UI controller that we'll use to actually fly this ship around in AR space. So this will be our ship that we load into our room, and using a controller like on our phone, we'll fly it around as if it were kind of like a drone, right? So we can have some fun with that. Yeah, have fun with this. Enjoy it. Mess around, see what you can come up with. I'm more concerned about you just kind of dipping your toes into these two softwares, Maya and Mudbox. Both are important, depending on what you want to use them for. They're industry software. I mean, everybody uses them. There's also Blender and other tools that are out there. Maya and Mudbox have been around forever. So they're really, really good kind of starter tools, and I think you can really accomplish a lot with these two tools. So anyways, have fun with the project. Hopefully these video tutorials do you well. I will upload these files for you shortly this week so you can continue with them, and then we will get this part done. So just wanted you guys to kind of get a bird's eye view of 3D creation for augmented reality. All right, talk to you guys later.